If you were to close your eyes right now and try to conjure up the ultimate image of the American West, the absolute archetype of the frontiersman, what enters your mind? I'm guessing it's a silhouette against a blazing sunset.
Almost certainly, a towering figure.
Exactly. You're likely picturing someone 6'4", shoulders like an ox, a booming voice that echoes across the canyon. Maybe he's wrestling a grizzly bear with one hand and firing a long rifle with the other. A real-life superhero clad in buckskin.
It is the image that has been sold to us for over 150 years. The dime novel hero, the man who, single-handedly conquered the wilderness.
But today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to peel back that layer of buckskin and look at the actual human being underneath. And the reality, well, it is jarringly different from the movie poster. We were talking about Christopher Kit Carson. And physically, the man was about 5'5".
On a good day, perhaps, yeah.
Right. Accounts from the time describe him as stoop-shouldered, bow-legged from a lifetime in the saddle,
Right.
and completely illiterate. General Sherman, who wasn't exactly known for his poetic flourishes, described Carson as having soft blue eyes and a voice that was, quote, soft and gentle as a woman's.
It's a striking contrast, isn't it? You have this legendary reputation as a ring-tailed roarer, a man who supposedly slew hundreds of enemies and tamed the continent, yet the man himself was quiet, modest, and by all accounts, incredibly understated. That's the central paradox of Kit Carson.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources here, biographies, military reports, historical reassessments, and we are going to unpack the reality behind the myth. We're going to look at his evolution from a runaway teen apprentice to a mountain man, then to an accidental national celebrity, and finally to a controversial military commander who is central to some of the most painful chapters in American history.
It's a complicated legacy, to put it mildly. We are going to see a man who evolves significantly over time, whose life intersects with almost every major turning point of the American West. But to understand how he became a symbol both of expansion and, of oppression, we have to start where it all began.
Which, surprisingly, isn't in the Rocky Mountains. It's a saddle shop in Missouri.
Right. But before the saddle shop, let's quickly ground his origins. He was born in Kentucky in 1809, but his family moved to the Missouri frontier, specifically a place called Boone's Lick, when he was just a baby. Now, when we say frontier in 1810, we need to be clear about what that means. This wasn't just rural farmland.
No, this was the absolute edge of the map.
It really was. They were living in what amounted to a war zone. The cabins were forted with stockades to protect against attacks from local tribes. It was a life defined by constant vigilance and just brutal, hard labor.
And tragedy struck his family really early on.
It did. His father, Lindsey Carson, died when Kit was only 8 years old. A tree limb fell on him while he was clearing a field.
That feels like such a harsh, grim way to go. No glory, just the environment itself crushing you.
And it threw the family into immediate poverty. And that poverty is really the key driver of his early life. It's what forced Kit, at age 14 or 15, into an apprenticeship. He was bound to a man named David Workman to learn the saddler's trade.
So imagine being that kid. You're a teenager, just full of energy, and you're stuck indoors stitching leather all day while the entire world is happening right outside your door.
And that shop was a hub. I mean, who's coming in? Trappers, traders, explorers. They're getting their gear fixed before heading out on the Santa Fe Trail.
So he's hearing all these stories.
Oh, absolutely. Stories of the shining mountains, of buffalo herds that take 3 days to pass a single point, of dangerous encounters and, incredible freedom. It was intoxicating. Carson hated the work. He couldn't handle the confinement. So in 1826, at 16 years old, he runs away. Against his mother's wishes, he joins a caravan heading west.
And this leads to my absolute favorite detail from his early years. Usually, when an apprentice runs away, the master is furious. He wants his labor back. So David Workman puts an ad in the newspaper.
Right, offering a reward for Kit's return.
A very specific reward.
1 cent.
1 cent.
Just a single penny.
To anyone who brings back the boy. And that ad actually gives us the first printed description of him. Thick-set, light hair. It was basically a joke. Nobody was going to chase him down for a penny.
It tells you exactly how much value he was perceived to have at that moment. But that penny bought his freedom. He makes it to Santa Fe and eventually settles in Taos, New Mexico. And Taos really becomes his home base for the rest of his life.
This is where the mountain man phase begins, right? The part of his life we all think we know.
Exactly. From about 1829 to 1841, Carson is living the life that we see in movies, but he didn't just stumble into it, he had to learn the trade.
He had mentors.
He did. He was mentored by some of the legends of the era, guys like Ewing Young and Matthew Kincaid. He was like a sponge. He learned trapping, sure, but he also learned languages. He picked up Spanish, French, and multiple Native American dialects. For an illiterate man, his linguistic capacity was extraordinary.
And the sources paint a picture of a life that was just incredibly brutal. We tend to romanticize the mountain man as this free spirit, answering to no one. But the economics of it.
The economics were terrible. They were effectively gig workers in a very harsh corporate system. They were part of what was called the rendezvous system.
How did that work exactly?
Well, they'd spend all year trapping beavers, usually alone or in small pairs, waist deep in freezing streams, facing constant danger. Then, once a year, they'd all meet the company wagons from St. Louis at a designated spot, the rendezvous.
And that's where the trap snaps shut.
That's a good way to put it. The company set the price for the pelts, which was always low, and then they set the price for the goods the trappers needed to survive another year: flour, coffee, gunpowder, fish hooks, which was astronomically high.
It's the classic company store model. You spend your entire year's earnings just to buy the supplies to survive the next year. You're always in debt.
Exactly. Most trappers were. But for Carson, it was still a world away from the saddle shop, and the physical danger was constant. You mentioned the bear earlier. That wasn't just a hypothetical. There is a famous account from 1834 where Carson is out hunting elk alone.
Can you set the scene for us?
Sure. He spots some elk, fires a shot, but then immediately realizes he's not alone. He runs into two grizzly bears. And these aren't the bears you see at the zoo. These are hungry, aggressive apex predators.
And they chase him.
They do. He has to scramble up a tree just in time, a little aspen tree, so not exactly a fortress. One bear eventually gave up, but the other stayed for hours, clawing at the bark, trying to shake him down. Carson later dictated in his memoirs that he had never been so scared in life.
But beyond nature, the defining struggle of this period was his relationship with Native American tribes. And this is where we have to be really careful not to simplify things. It wasn't just Carson versus the Indians.
No, not at all. It was a complex web of alliances and enmities. The mountain men were intruders, certainly, but they inserted themselves into existing geopolitical rivalries. Carson lived among tribes, he traded with them, and he married into them. But he also fought certain tribes with lethal efficiency.
Specifically the Blackfoot.
Right. The Blackfoot were viewed as the mortal enemy by many trappers, largely because the Blackfoot fiercely and effectively defended their territory against this economic extraction. There's a really disturbing account from 1838. Carson is traveling with Jim Bridger, another titan of the era. They come across a Blackfoot village that has been decimated by smallpox.
So this is a horror show. Bodies in the teepees.
Yeah.
The village is literally dying.
It is. And Bridger, who was a pragmatist, wanted to move on. He was likely afraid of the disease, if nothing else, but Carson and the younger men wanted to fight. They attacked the village.
An already dying village.
Yes. And Carson later called it the prettiest fight I ever saw.
That quote is so difficult to digest. The prettiest fight. It shows a kind of a callousness that was typical of the mountain man culture of that specific time. It was a sport to them.
It was, but then you have to juxtapose that violence with his personal life, especially his marriages, which suggests a very different kind of integration. His first wife was an Arapaho woman named Juanibe, or singing grass.
And that relationship wasn't casual. He didn't just take a wife in the way some trappers did. He actually fought a duel for her.
This is a scene straight out of a Western. A French trapper named Chouinard was harassing Juanibe, making unwanted advances. Carson didn't just tell him to knock it off. He challenged him to a duel. They rode at each other on horseback, pistols drawn.
Talk about high stakes.
Incredibly high. Carson shot the Frenchman's thumb off. The Frenchman's bullet grazed Carson's face and singed his hair. It was inches from ending his story right there. But he won her hand, so to speak.
Juanibe and Carson had a daughter, Adeline. But sadly, Juanibe died after childbirth a few years later. He then married a Cheyenne woman named Making Out Road, but that was short-lived.
Very short-lived. And I love the detail about how that marriage ended. It says a lot about the agency of Native women at the time. She divorced him according to a Cheyenne custom.
Which was?
She simply put all his property and their child, Adeline, outside the tent.
Universal sign for, you're out.
A very clear message. There was no ambiguity there. But his third marriage to Josefa Jaramillo in 1843 was the one that lasted. She was from a prominent Hispano family in Taos. He was 33, she was just 14.
Which was not uncommon for the time and place.
Correct. And to marry her, he actually converted to Catholicism and was baptized. This marriage was a huge step for him socially. It connected him deeply to the established culture of New Mexico. It moved him from being an outsider, a gringo trapper, to being part of the fabric of Taos society.
So by the early 1840s, the bottom has fallen out of the beaver market.
Completely. Silk hats became the fashion in Europe, and the demand for beaver pelts just evaporated. The era of the mountain man was effectively over. Carson needed a new job. He started working as a hunter for Bent's Fort for $1 a day. He's a respected, capable guy, but nobody outside the frontier knows who he is.
Until a chance meeting on a steamboat changes everything.
Enter John C. Frémont.
The Pathfinder.
Or, as some historians might argue, the great self-promoter. In 1842, Carson is on a boat on the Missouri River, heading back to visit his daughter. He runs into Frémont, who is an ambitious lieutenant in the Army's Corps of Topographical Engineers. Frémont's looking for a guide for his expedition to map the Oregon Trail.
And Carson just happens to be there.
Right place, right time. Carson introduces himself, modestly saying he has some experience in the mountains. Frémont likes his quiet, capable demeanor and hires him on the spot for $100 a month.
Which was huge money compared to hunting buffalo for $1 a day.
It was life-changing. But the money wasn't the real payoff. The real payoff was the publicity. Frémont was a meticulous record keeper, and his wife, Jessie Benton Frémont, was a brilliant writer and political operator. She took Frémont's dry government reports and polished them into these romantic, high-adventure narratives that absolutely captivated the American public.
And Carson was the co-star of these stories.
He was the hero, really. These reports were bestsellers. They fueled what was called Oregon fever, encouraging thousands of settlers to head west. And in these stories, Carson is the steady hand, the fearless scout. When Frémont is impulsive or in over his head, Carson is the rock. He's the one who knows what to do.
We have to talk about some of the specific exploits from these expeditions because they are what made him famous. There's the rescue in the Mojave Desert in 1843.
This is the quintessential hero moment. It's almost too cinematic to be true, but it happened. Frémont's party comes across a Mexican man and a boy who are in shock. Their party had been ambushed by a group of Native Americans. The men in their group had been killed, and the women were. Well, they were snaked to the ground and mutilated. It was a scene of absolute horror.
And Carson reacts instantly.
Instantly. He and another scout, a man named Alexis Godey, rode after the attackers. Just the two of them. They tracked them for miles, found their camp, killed two of them in a surprise attack, scalped them, and recovered the stolen horses.
When people back east read that, it solidified him as this avenging angel of the West. But looking at the sources, the Frémont expeditions also have a very, very dark side. There are incidents that look less like heroism and more like massacres.
We cannot ignore this part of the story. The Sacramento River Massacre in 1846 is a key event. Frémont's party, feeling an attack based on what seems to be very shaky intelligence, launched a preemptive strike on a Wintu village.
A village that might not have even been hostile.
Exactly. They killed somewhere between 120 and 300 men, women, and children. And Carson himself, in his own memoirs, later described it as a perfect butchery.
Perfect butchery. He recognized the slaughter for what it was, and then there's the Klamath Lake incident.
Yes. Frémont's camp was attacked at night by a group of Klamath warriors, and 3 of his men were killed. In retaliation, the next day, they found a nearby Klamath village, which again likely had nothing to do with the initial attack, and destroyed it. Carson was reportedly so enraged over the death of his friends that he took an axe and knocked the head of a dead Native American to pieces.
It's visceral and brutal. It shows a rage that really contradicts the gentle voice descriptions we heard earlier.
It does. And then a little later, during the Bear Flag Revolt in California, under Frémont's orders, Carson executed 3 unarmed civilians. An old Californian man named Beresa and his 2 nephews. They were just carrying a message.
And the order was to take no prisoners.
Frémont told him, "I have no room for prisoners," so Carson executed them. It suggests a man who, for all his personal courage and skill, was also a soldier following orders. He could shut off his moral compass when the chain of command was involved.
But speaking of that courage, though, we have to mention the barefoot run during the Mexican-American War. This is arguably his most famous military feat, and it's pure heroism.
This is the Battle of San Pasqual, December 1846. General Kearny's Army of the West is surrounded by Mexican lancers. They are pinned down on a hill, starving and running out of water. They're making tea out of mule urine. It's a desperate situation.
And they need to get a message to the American forces in San Diego.
Right. It's a suicide mission. So Carson, along with a lieutenant named Beale and an Indian scout, volunteer, they sneak out at night, crawling through the Mexican lines. To be quiet, they had to take their shoes off and tie them around their necks.
And they lost them.
They lost the shoes, so they had to walk 25 miles barefoot through a landscape filled with cactus and sharp volcanic rock. Carson said later that his feet were so full of prickly pear spines he could hardly walk for weeks after. But they made it. They got through. They delivered the message, and the relief column arrived.
And the irony is just incredible. After all that, Carson gets sent to Washington, D.C. as a courier to deliver news of the victory in California. He thinks he's just a scout delivering the mail. He arrives in the capital and he discovers he's a national superstar.
The accidental celebrity. By the late 1840s, the dime novel industry was taking off, and these sensationalist writers needed a hero. They latched onto the name Kit Carson from Frémont's reports.
This brings us to the myth versus man section of our deep dive.
Yeah.
The dime novels are, well, they're hilarious. They depict him as this giant, a 6-foot-tall Hercules, slaying Indians by the hundreds. One author, Charles Averill, wrote a book called Kit Carson, the Prince of the Gold Hunters.
And Carson hated them. He was a practical, modest man who valued competence and truth. He found the stories embarrassing. When he was shown one of these books, he famously said, "Every statement made is false." But there is a really tragic side to this fame, too.
The story of Ann White. This one really hit me when I was reading the sources.
It's a haunting story. It's 1849. Carson is guiding a group of soldiers to rescue a woman named Ann White and her child, who had been captured by Jicarilla Apaches. The soldiers spotted the Apache camp, and Carson, with his experience, urged the commanding officer to attack immediately.
But the officer hesitated.
He wanted to be more cautious, to get organized. He dallied. And in that delay, the Apaches killed Ann White. By the time the soldiers finally charged, it was too late.
And they were going through the abandoned camp.
Carson found a book lying on the ground near her body. It was one of those dime novels, a book featuring a fictional superhero version of Kit Carson.
That is just devastating.
He was haunted by it for the rest of his life. He was tormented by the thought that Ann White might have read that book during her captivity, that she might have held on to hope, thinking, the real Kit Carson is coming, and he never fails. And then the real human Carson arrived. But he was bound by the hesitation of a superior officer, and he failed her.
The weight of his own myth actually crushing him in a way.
It stayed with him. And it's funny, even his own memoirs were subject to this kind of polishing. Carson, as we said, was illiterate. He threw down my spelling book to fight Indians, as he put it. So he dictated his memoirs. But they were rewritten by others, specifically a man named Dr. DeWitt Peters, to be more moral and flowery.
And Carson didn't like that either.
No. He complained that Peters laid it on a little too thick. He just wanted the plain facts, but the world wanted the legend.
So we move into the 1850s. The fur trade is long dead. The Mexican-American War is over. Carson decides to settle down in Taos with Josefa and takes a government job. He becomes a federal Indian agent.
This is a crucial pivot in his life. For 7 years, from 1854 to 1861, his job is not to fight Native Americans, but to be the intermediary between the U.S. government and the Ute, the Jicarilla Apache, and the Paus Pueblo people.
A completely different role.
Completely. And because he couldn't read or write, he had to hire a secretary to handle all the paperwork. But he was apparently very effective in the field. His duties were things like preventing conflict, distributing food and clothing, and negotiating disputes over stolen livestock.
And the sources suggest his views were really evolving here. He wasn't the young man looking for the prettiest fight anymore.
Not at all. He advocated for fair treatment. His official reports are filled with complaints that the government wasn't sending enough food or clothing. He saw the corruption in the system up close. But, and this is a big but, he also came to a firm conclusion about the future of Native Americans.
The reservation policy.
Yes. Carson looked at the flood of white settlers, the miners, the farmers, and he decided that the traditional nomadic way of life was doomed. He believed the only way to save these tribes from total extinction was to move them onto reservations, teach them how to farm, and physically separate them from white settlements and, as he put it, ardent spirits, alcohol.
So in his mind, He thought he was saving them.
He absolutely did. He viewed it as the only humane alternative to what he saw as inevitable genocide. He believed that if they stayed in the path of American expansion, they would simply be wiped out. But that belief, however well-intentioned he thought it was, led him to participate in actions that many today view as cultural genocide.
Which brings us to the Civil War and the Navajo campaign. This is the heavy stuff. When the Civil War broke out, Carson sided with the Union.
He did. He commanded the 1st New Mexico Volunteer Infantry. What's interesting here is that his troops were mostly Hispanic volunteers from New Mexico. The regular Army command, particularly a Colonel Canby, was very skeptical of them. They didn't think these volunteers would actually fight.
But they did.
They did. At the Battle of Valverde in 1862, against Confederate Texans, Carson and his men held their ground while other regular Army units faltered. He was fiercely proud of them and defended them against the prejudice of the regular Army officers.
But once the Confederates were pushed out of New Mexico, the Union Army there turned its attention back to the tribes. And a new commander arrived, General James Carleton. And Carleton was intense.
Carleton was a hardliner. He believed in a scorched earth policy. He wanted a final solution to the Indian problem in New Mexico. He decided all tribes would be moved to a single reservation called Bosque Redondo. First, he ordered Carson to round up the Mescalero Apache. The order was explicit: kill all the men you can and capture the women and children.
And Carson did it.
He executed the order efficiently, and by 1863, the Mescalero were moved. And then Carleton turned his full attention to the Navajo.
The Navajo campaign of 1863 to 1864. This is the defining controversy of Carson's legacy.
It is. Carleton ordered Carson to take no prisoners until the Navajo surrendered. Carson knew he couldn't chase the Navajo through their vast territory. They knew the land, they were too fast. So he changed tactics.
He stopped hunting men and started hunting their livelihood.
Exactly. He waged economic warfare. He didn't chase the people, he destroyed their economy. He burned their hogans, destroyed their cornfields, and slaughtered their livestock, thousands of sheep and goats. The most symbolic and painful moment of this campaign was the invasion of Canyon de Chelly,
which was a sacred stronghold for the Navajo.
a sacred place and their agricultural heartland. Carson's troops marched into the canyon in the middle of winter, and they cut down thousands of peach trees.
Peach trees that had been cultivated there for generations. It wasn't just destroying food, it was destroying a connection to the land, to their ancestors.
It was a devastating psychological blow, and it worked. The combination of cold and starvation broke the Navajo resistance. They began to surrender in droves, and that led to what is known today as the Long Walk.
Thousands of Navajo men, women, and children were forced to walk hundreds of miles across New Mexico to this desolate reservation at Bosque Redondo.
Many died along the way from exposure and hunger, and the conditions at the reservation were horrific. The water was bad, disease was rampant, the crops failed. It was a complete disaster.
What was Carson's role in this part? Did he try to stop it?
The sources show he was weary of it. He actually tried to resign. He was tired, his health was failing, and he didn't seem to have the stomach for the kind of total war Carleton was demanding. But he was a soldier. He followed orders. And because he was the face of the campaign, he is the one who carries the historical blame for the Long Walk.
It's so interesting that while he is remembered for the brutality of the Navajo campaign, his military career actually ended with a battle where he saved his men by not attacking.
The first Battle of Adobe Walls in 1864. This is a fascinating tactical moment. Carson led a force against the Kiowa and Comanche in the Texas Panhandle. He thought he was attacking a small village, but he stumbled into a massive encampment. We're talking over 1,000 warriors.
This is a Custer at Little Beadhorn situation waiting to happen.
It was almost exactly that scenario a decade before Custer. But unlike Custer, Carson immediately realized he was massively outnumbered and outmatched. He ordered a fighting retreat. He used his 2 small howitzers to provide covering fire and expertly withdrew his men. It was considered a brilliant tactical retreat that saved his command from annihilation.
But his health was catching up with him by this point.
It was. He was appointed a brigadier general, then commanded Fort Garland in Colorado, but he was declining rapidly. He had an aortic aneurysm that was pressing on his windpipe, making it hard to breathe.
Yet he made one last trip to Washington, D.C. in 1868.
He did. He went with a delegation of Ute chiefs to plead for government assistance for their people. He saw himself as their advocate. The long, hard journey just worsened his condition.
He returned to Colorado, and then tragedy struck his family again.
His wife, Josefa, died shortly after giving birth to their 8th child. Carson was devastated, and his own health collapsed completely. He died just a month later in May of 1868. His last words were fitting for a man who straddled so many worlds. He said, "Goodbye, friends. Adios, compadres."
So when we look at his legacy, it's just a roller coaster. Let's trace that reputation shift.
In the 19th and early 20th century, he was the untarnished hero, the symbol of manifest destiny. You had statues, Kit Carson days, towns and rivers named after him. The message was he led the way.
And then in the late 20th century,
The pendulum swung hard the other way. The bury my heart at Wounded Knee era reassessed the history of the West. Carson was recast as the villain, a genocidal racist. There was a symposium in Taos in the 90s where people debated whether he was a hero or just a butcher.
and today, where do most historians land?
Today, there's more nuance. Historians like Hampton Sides and David Roberts argue he is neither a perfect hero nor a cartoon villain. He was a complex man of his time who evolved. He went from a young man who killed Blackfeet for sport to an old man who defended the Utes. And yet, he's the same man who executed the brutal Navajo policy, believing it was the only alternative to their total extinction.
It raises a final, really provocative question. If Kit Carson had died in 1848, right after the Mexican-American War, he would be remembered solely as the daring explorer, the hero of Frémont's reports. Because he lived to serve the government's policies in the 1860s, he became a symbol of oppression. It makes you wonder how much of a historical figure's legacy is defined by their own choices versus the orders they are compelled to follow.
That is the central question of his life, isn't it? Where does the man end and the historical forces begin?
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.